Welcome to Vision Chats at Johns Hopkins, where the only thing that matters in the next hour is the future. With me today is Bill Burnett, who goes without really introduction. He's the executive director of the design program at Stanford, one of the co-founders of the Life Design Lab, and also one of the two co-authors of Designing Your Life. Many people are familiar with that book. We've also invited Dave Evans, his co-founder and co-author, and he may or may not jump in during the next hour. So this is all to create some type of suspense for you all. Dave is dealing with some family things, but he promised that if he's able to, he might jump in to help him in the conversation. Bill, the last time we talked was a while back, and it seems like the world has just completely flipped upside down since then. And I cannot wait to jump into a conversation with you today about how does one design their lives in such a disrupted world. It's been 221 days since the first reported case in the world, 156 days since the first reported case of COVID-19. Over 9 million people have been diagnosed with COVID-19 around the world, 2.3 here in the United States. And before we even start talking about designing life, I just want to take a quick second to say to all of the people who have been impacted by this disease, the loss of life, that our thoughts and prayers go with them, that 122,000 people have died in the United States, over 500,000 people around the world. So the amount of tragedy in this has been tremendous, and we want to start there first. It goes without saying that along with COVID-19, we're seeing the world just changing all over the place, and issues that we've been dealing with for a long time are coming back to the surface. The Black Lives Matter movement has taken up during this time again. It's been 90 days since George Floyd was brutally murdered in the hands of law enforcement, and we're continuing to deal with social justice issues. And I believe that in the next months, as we're all forced to slow down and to think about the life that we're in, we're going to be dealing with other issues like climate change and the gender equity and the workplace and automation. So, Bill, it's a lot that we're dealing with now. So, how has this shifted the whole concept of life design for you and for Dave?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Farouk. Dave and I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Farouk when he was at that other school, Stanford, and now he's at Johns Hopkins. What you just summarized, there's layers, and just layers and layers and layers of pain and tragedy and soul searching and disruption going on right now. It's really, I remember sitting in office hours with my students in December, telling them, you're graduating into the best job market I've ever seen. The Valley is booming, startups everywhere. This is going to be awesome. You're going to have your pick of, really fun things to do. And not 3 months later, I'm sitting with my students, just counseling them through the grief that they're feeling right now, that they lost their whole senior spring, that they didn't have a graduation. Some of them have lost family members. I've had students who've lost family members to COVID, grandparents and things like that, uncles and aunts. Obviously, the social fabric of everything that they've experienced has just been ruptured. So it is a pretty interesting and a pretty difficult time. But I think an old one of my favorite bosses ever in one of my startups said, "Never waste a good crisis." So Dave and I have been thinking a lot about this. And how do you design your life in COVID times, and how do you design your life when really we got to look at the issue of whether that's an option for everybody. So let me address the Black Lives Matter thing first, just because that's really important, and it's really been on my mind. We've made a commitment in the lab that we're not going to teach any classes until we revise our curriculum to include the issue that not everybody can participate at the same level or with the same personal freedoms and the networks of power and privilege that we as white people enjoy. And so we're going to do a thorough redesign of our curriculum to make sure that all of our Black students and all of our students of color and all of our students, LGBTQ, whatever students, feel included in the class and feel represented in the the way we teach it and the people who teach it. So we're working pretty hard on that because, it really should be designing our lives together, because you don't just design your own life without respect to friends, partners, families, and society that we design into. And we just have to we just have to admit that some people do not have access, fair access and equitable access to the systems that we design into, particularly for jobs and for the economic systems that give us, that are partly why we work. So we put a statement out on our website that the time has come to design an America and a world where Black lives matter in practice, not just in protest. And that as designers, we have a special responsibility to make sure that our designs include everyone. So I think that's one of the big shifts for Dave and I were real. And this actually had come up before because, when we created the class in the book, it really was about this idea of an individual thinking about their lives and designing into, an uncertain future. And certainly the uncertain future is more uncertain than ever before. But we actually, there was a big gap in our thinking. We sort of implied that, well, of course you do this with friends, family, partners, and the society you work in, but we never made it explicit. And we actually pitched a book to our editors at Knopf called Designing Your Life Together. And thinking more about the issues of, partnership and social systems. They weren't that particularly interested at the time in that book. We ended up doing a book on work called Designing Your Work Life, which came out just as the pandemic was starting. Mm-hmm. But I'll land this answer really quickly here. So one of the things that's changed is we firmly support the Black Lives Matters movement. We believe we need to redesign the curriculum to make sure that we've scrubbed it entirely for inclusion and equity and an examination of white privilege and power, and to make sure that we've removed any potential microaggressions and things from that, because we the first rule in all this is do no harm. The second thing is that the COVID crisis points out something that's that we've been talking about for a long time, and it points it out in tremendous with tremendous volume, is that the future is uncertain. We had been talking lately about the future of automation, and the robots are coming, and AI is coming, and how will that change the landscape of the jobs we're designing into? Because it's pretty clear when you look at all the research, and this probably better than I do, in the next 10 years, whole new job categories will emerge. Completely, jobs that you can't even apply for now will be the most important jobs in 10 years or 15 years because they don't exist now. And I've been through this cycle. You've been through this cycle before. I mean, before spreadsheets, people did data entry into things called spreadsheets. They were on paper, and then we got spreadsheets, and then analysis and the kind of data analysis trends started, and now we have big data and other things. If a student of mine had come to me and said, "Hey, I want to do AI and design together," and he was talking to me 15 years ago, I would say, "It doesn't exist. There is no AI. There is no connection." Now that'll probably be the most important part of our profession, how AI informs design, because design is constantly trying to create something new and finding patterns in past data that might project new things in the future. So Dave and I have always said, no plan for your life survives first contact with reality. And I think it's more true now than before that if you don't take a resilient approach to your future, if you don't take an approach that's inherently flexible, where you have a point of view and a path but you always have, you know, three, not one, three options, not one. You're always moving forward into your emerging future, but you're doing it in a way that is resilient, not brittle. If there's just one thing you wanted to do, and it's the thing you want to do for the rest of your life, you're setting up a very fragile future. Because forgetting global pandemics, you know, we will be changing the way we work in the future. We will be changing our relationship to work and society. We may end up, you know, in a society where all of the rote and not very interesting jobs. It wasn't interesting to be a data entry clerk for accountants on spreadsheets, by the way. It's way more interesting to do your own spreadsheets. But, you know, the most of the things that people do are easily replaceable by very, very smart systems. We don't really have artificial intelligence yet, not in any general form. I mean, we've got some really, you know, really smart pattern matching algorithms that can read an X-ray, but that same piece of software can't, you know, design a coffee maker, right? They're all very, very specific, but they'll change the way we work, and they'll add new opportunities for the way we're going to work in the future. So I think the net is that the COVID-19 crisis, one, demonstrates the fragility of our economy and our supply chains. Two, it's just a in-your-face example of the future's not certain. And the best strategies for moving forward are strategies that have high resilience, which means they can anticipate unanticipatable, you know, futures, and they're flexible. And design is all of those things.
Yeah, and design is also agility, which I think you're alluding to. And what I've been thinking about for the last several weeks is how the current moment that we're living in might be creating more dysfunctional beliefs, that people might be just falling into new dysfunctional beliefs that we haven't had to deal with before. And I've heard you and Dave talk a lot about finding passion, for example, is a dysfunctional belief, that your passion is somewhere out there and you go on a scavenger hunt and find it. As opposed to creating it, you know, using the moments that you're in and creating it through a process of prototyping and testing and designing. I know you and Dave also spoke about the concept of new normal. I love the way you describe that too. Is that a real belief or dysfunctional belief that we get to create this new normal? What are some of the things that you've been pondering about the dysfunctional beliefs and how they might be actually trapping us even further into a new way of thinking while we're being trapped in our own homes?
Well, and it's, you know, it's like I said, it's layers and layers of challenges, right? And where do you start? But this notion of a new normal, it's like, well, I think a lot of, you know, one superpower of a designer is the ability to reframe any situation. If you're stuck and you don't have any good answers, then you reframe the problem and try to open up the solution space, provide yourself with more freedom to come up with the answers. You may still have to come back to the original framing in order to implement, but as long as you can reframe and, you know, and come up with lots of ideas, you have more flexibility. So this notion, I think a lot of people right now are thinking, okay, I'm just going to hunker down and wait this thing out. It's been 200 days, you know, it's been 100 days of lockdown in my city, a little bit longer than that. And, but when it's over, it'll all just be back to the way it was. Mm-hmm. And there's lots and lots of evidence that that's just not going to be true. That people aren't going to go back to offices and work in offices side by side, you know, in cubicles. That people aren't going to, you know, go to movie theaters and just do all the things that they did before, at least not for a while. And then even then, what we've discovered is that, hey, there's a lot of productivity in this working from home thing. There's a lot more flexibility in this working from home thing. Many companies have already announced, hey, working from home will be the new normal. Mm-hmm. And offices will be, you know, run just for purposes of getting people together for meetings and things. And so if you're waiting for everything to return to what it was before, you're setting yourself up for a lot of waiting and probably some disappointment. So the important thing right now is to accept. So we talk about gravity problems and acceptance. Accept that this is normal. It's just normal. It's going to be the normal from now on.
This is powerful.
Once you've decided, all right, look, I don't, accept doesn't mean I endorse this or that I like this. Accept is just, all right, here's where we're at. Now, what can we do from here? Yeah. What's available to us? And, I mentioned, the job market has really changed. And so we've hired this guy, Victor Sad, out of Chicago, the Experience Institute. Amazing guy, and he's helping the students, kind of reframe their job search and find jobs. And I've been calling everybody I know, and it turns out there's lots of jobs out there, but it's really lumpy, right? I had students who had great job offers at Airbnb and Lyft. Well, those have obviously been canceled because those companies are, collapsing. But I just had a student get hired at Facebook's AR/VR team. And a student get hired at Zoom, and a student get hired at Apple, because their businesses are actually booming. Because when people are working from home, they need more technology. They need more, they're going to be experimenting more and more with things like virtual reality. So once you accept that this is just the way it is and it's lumpy, it doesn't mean you can't find the job you're looking for. It just means you need to change your strategy, and you need to look where the opportunities are. And so all of our techniques are even more important now, that you find jobs not by searching the internet, but by having conversations with people. The best way to find a job is not to ask for a job, but to ask for the story. Tell me the story of what you do. That jobs will be exchanged in networks. I was just talking to the head of design for one of the largest companies in the world, who on the outside says complete hiring freeze and we're laying people off. And I talked to him, I said, is this true? And he said, yes and no. I've got a bunch of openings, and if I had the right candidate, I could hire them tomorrow. And we have recently we've doubled down on our commitment for diversity and inclusion. You have a diversity candidate, I can get them an interview in 24 hours. So again, it's all about having conversations with people to find out what's actually going on, because you can't make any assumptions from what you hear in the news. So accept this is just normal. Reframe. Okay, if I wanted a job in the hospitality industry, that's not going to happen for the next 5 years. But what's similar to that? What would be similar to that experience that I could still learn and grow into? And once I've got a reframe that's generative, that's starting to provide me leads and answers and stuff. And this isn't just about jobs. This is just about life, like finding interesting things to do. Take your curiosity. Dave says, take your curiosity for a walk. What are you curious about? Go out and talk to people. Then prototype the experiences that will give you data about this, what the possible futures look like, and then tell your story. And that's a virtuous cycle of getting curious, talk to people, try stuff, tell your story. Then more people hear about you and what your journey is, and they say, oh, I know a guy, or I know this woman who's doing this really interesting work over in Oakland. I just met an architect who does what she calls inclusive space design. Her name's Liz Ogbu. She's an African-American architect, graduated from Harvard, and then pretty much said, yeah, it's kind of not the kind of architecture I want to do. And now she's doing amazing work with communities, designing spaces that are inclusive and very powerful. It's a powerful reframe on what does an architect do? Make a pretty building with a nice facade, or make a place where communities join together? Once you have that reframe, and it's about community and inclusion, you have a whole new practice, right? So we're always going to argue for, if you don't like your reality, change your point of view. Some realities are just, you can't do anything about them. They're gravity problems. So now you just have to accept that that's the case. Right now we're in the lockdown, and it looks like, I was just reading in the paper today, the whole thing is spiked again, and now they're talking about more lockdowns. but I got to give a shout out to science and to good, and to good governance and good government. My city, San Francisco, locked down 2 days before the state lockdown. And we were the first, I think, state to lock down when we saw the COVID numbers increasing. We have roughly the same population density, people per square mile, as New York, roughly within a 20%. San Francisco locked down, I think, 14 days before New York. I just looked it up. We have 48 deaths in San Francisco. New York City has 17,000. And that's the difference 10 days makes when you're on an exponential curve and it's doubling every day, right? And humans just don't think exponentially. We think linearly, Tomorrow will be like today, maybe a little worse, a little bit. We don't understand that if tomorrow is twice as bad and then the next day is twice as bad and the next day is twice as bad and the next day is twice as bad, we're now 16 times worse than we were before. So part of living in reality is living in the science of the way you beat an exponential is cut it off at the beginning. It's really hard in the, once things get going. And so, we'll probably, the city's slowly reopening, like outdoor dining, things like that. But I bet we'll take another 2 or 3 months before we really get back to something that would be considered a little bit more normal. And so what's a life designer do? Well, you take into account all these things. You get the best information you can. Some things are predictable. An exponential is an exponential function. The next day will be twice as bad as today. Or if the exponent is 3 times or 4 times, then you're really going crazy. One thing I point out to my students, as bad as this is I call this a baby pandemic. This coronavirus is more deadly than the common flu. It's in the same category as a flu virus, more deadly, but not nearly as deadly as SARS or Ebola. Ebola, which is horrible, like 10%, mortality. And this, I don't know, they're still calculating this will be 1 or 2% mortality. And the flu is, 0.5% or something. But the flu still killed 70,000 people this year, right? So let's not take right off of that. What if we had this type of a pandemic and we had a 10% mortality pathogen? This shows you how ill prepared we were for just, a little more deadly, but still quite serious, flu virus. What if we had something that was truly deadly? So we really need to get our act together. And there's great places for designers and design thinking and people who think like designers in redesigning everything now. Redesigning what a hospital is, redesigning what a hotel is, or what a hospitality experience feels like. Redesigning public transportation to make it safer, cleaner. So I think there's never waste a good crisis. There's tons of opportunity in this situation. It's just it takes, you can't start problem solving until you've accepted where you're at. Dave will always say, you can't solve a problem you're not willing to have. And a lot of people are just not willing to have, COVID-19 as a global insult to their personal freedom or their personal, agency.
I so agree with you, but you're reminding me of a lot of conversations I've had in recent weeks. COVID-19 is playing the role of a reality check, having us all to forcing us to deal with reality. It's also playing the role of forcing us to deal with demons that have been around us for a long time. And I feel like that's, I actually do believe personally, this is my personal opinion, that Black Lives Matter movement, for example, potentially wouldn't have been in the front or in the thinking of the public consciousness of everybody had we not been forced to stay in our homes and pay attention. So it's forcing us to pay attention to a lot of things. That's why I believe that it's only a matter of time before we start paying attention to other demons that are around us, like climate change, like the Me Too movement, which I believe we're probably one incident away from having that coming back to public consciousness. So it is forcing us to deal with those demons. I also think that COVID-19 is playing the role of an accelerant. It's accelerating a lot of trends that we've known were coming for years now. Automation is nothing new. We just thought that we're 10, 20 years away from that fully taking over. Virtual reality, working remotely, like this, like the way we're doing, online learning, all of these things are happening. So there's a lot of realities for us to accept. It's not just one, and a lot of things that we're forced to finally deal with. Bill, I want to really have a meaningful conversation with you about how people from different backgrounds deal with these realities. I mean, the concept that you're laying down makes perfect sense. It's accept the reality, invest in prototyping. The advice I often give to people who are depressed about the situation we're in is, this is your ideal moment to put your best and most risky prototype to test, because what else you got?
Why not?
Why not?
Nothing else is going to happen, right?
Think of your craziest idea, as long as you're really inspired by it, and put it to test. This is the moment to do it. And in fact, investors, now this is the time when they are opening up their wallets to invest in some of the crazy ideas, because we're going to see a birth of new industries and industry sectors and new companies. But I want you to imagine these two scenarios with me, and let's talk about them. And there's no shaming here. Every person has their own situation, and it's good. But let's pick that kid, that student who is experiencing quarantine in a mountain house with a big window. I might be exaggerating, maybe not, just for effect here. A big window behind them. So that's what you see in the Zoom camera. You see a big lake behind that window. You're with me here. So there's a lot of access to privilege in that image. And I want you to imagine the other student who is also experiencing this shutdown in this moment, where they're back with their family. This is a student of color who is first to go to college in their family, and who is helping their parents deal with the situation of their family restaurant and how they're handling that in this moment. So how do you go from accepting reality to put your riskiest prototype from these two different perspectives and different access to points to networks and to privilege, and take risks and get support, etc. And most importantly, you and I work for universities. What is our job in this? Where do we come in to try to help out?
Well, there's a lot of layers.
I know.
Listen, I have it. As you were describing that, I can picture two of my students, and one of the things that's been extraordinary about the spring quarter, was I got to know my students better last quarter than I've ever did, because one kid was zooming in from the pool house at his family's mansion in Brentwood. Lots of bandwidth, new laptop, cruising. Yeah. In a great space. I go, hey, that's a pretty cool pool you got there. That's a really nice house, right?
And there's no problem with that. Like,
no problem.
Shaming that.
My next Zoom meeting is, with a kid who's, in a family of 6 in a 2-bedroom apartment, on the other side of LA. And I was wondering, like, hey, I noticed you're kind of falling behind and stuff. What's going on? And he's like, well, look, I'm working 2 jobs. Because my family's, I think the statistic I just read, which is frightening, is that if you had an income of $40,000 or less going into this crisis, there's a 50% unemployment rate. Not this 10 or 13 or 14% they're reporting. And for $40,000 worker, that's your hospitality, that's your maid who's a cleaner or a maid at a hotel. That's the hotel worker. That's the restaurant worker. 50% unemployment. And my other student was saying, yeah, I'm working 2 jobs and we're just trying to keep things afloat here. And I know I'm falling behind in my work, but And I'm a person of color, and I've also been, out at the protests. So people are, it really pointed out to me that my students live very different realities, very different lives. And I knew that, I knew that some of the kids, were had a harder experience, but I never really got into the details of it because it's, they weren't going to tell me, and in some cases they might have been embarrassed to tell me.
Right.
So I think this puts a huge responsibility on our universities. And, your university and my university are massively endowed. My university has a $26 billion endowment. I've got a whole nother thing we could talk about, but if you take the top 5 universities by endowment, private universities, not counting University of Texas system, it's Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, MIT. That's almost $140 billion in endowment. If you take the top 25 universities by endowment, it's $300 billion. Add in all the rest of the universities, and they have $300 billion. So, and the 25 top endowed universities educate 1% of our college students. So we're in the 1%, Farouk. We're the 1 percenters everybody's arguing about. And what are we doing to lead in this pandemic? Oh, they just announced they're laying off a whole bunch of people at Harvard because I guess they think they're poor. Stanford tried to lay off all the gardeners and food service workers and everybody else, and the students flipped out, and so they backed off on that a little bit. But everybody's talking about how much we're cutting, and yet we're sitting. The 1 percenters are sitting on $300 billion of endowments. Now I know much of the endowments are linked to donors' requests for certain things, and the endowments have certain objectives, but donors aren't immobile. And about 20% of most universities' endowments are unrestricted. They can be spent on, at the discretion of the board of trustees. Now, I have a lot of sympathy for university presidents because they don't actually control the endowments. The fiduciaries, the trustee of the endowment is the board of trustees. But we ought to all get together and just decide that we're not gonna make these kids work 3 jobs. If, Stanford typically does a 5% payout, and they just announced they're going to do a little less than that. But if they did a 6% payout of their endowment, everyone could go to school for free. So why don't we just decide that all the students get to go to school for free for the next 2 years, and take that layer of emotional, labor off of the kids. And some of my kids would still work a job because they're sending money home to mom and dad, who maybe lost their job at the hotel or at the restaurant. But we could do a lot more than we're doing. And we have the means to do it. And so the notion that we're somehow a company, most of my career has been in companies, worked at Apple and a lot of other companies. When a company has an economic downturn and its profits are impacted, it contracts, it lays people off, it rebalances its P&L, and then it goes forward. But we're not companies. We're giant nonprofits. All of our endowments are tax exempt because they're supposed to be used for the public good. James Stanford's letter that the mission of the university was in part to have a positive impact on society. We have the ability to do that, and we can do so much more. Again, never waste a good crisis. We can help our students and just take the economic burden off of them. We can help the communities we live in. And I see no reason why we can't reach out to all the other. Think of how many schools are now in an economic crisis, right? I mean, if you're a small liberal arts, I grew up right outside of Boston. If you're a small liberal arts college in New England, you're Middlebury or Smith or Bowdoin or Colby or one of these beautiful, when people take a picture of a college campus, those are the campuses they take pictures of, and they're just gorgeous, wonderful schools, liberal arts schools primarily. They're all going to go out of business. They live entirely off of student tuition. They don't have $20 billion sitting in the bank, to bring them through this crisis. So this is our neighborhood. We should, this is what neighbors do. They reach out and they help each other. So I think we can do more to help our students. And I think we can do more to help people in general in the academic. I mean, if all these schools go out of business, we're going to lose a generation of scholars. We're going to lose a generation of professors. We're going to lose a generation of poets and historians. I mean, you name it. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to one other thing, because that's a little maybe off to the side. I think our schools can do more, and certainly schools, like Johns Hopkins and Stanford have the means. But remember I said this first step is accept? There's another thing going on here that I think is really important to notice. And this was, I think, an article Dave sent me a while back. I think it was maybe out of Harvard Business Review. The thing we're going through as a nation, I think, and as a world, is we're going through a grief cycle. We've lost something. Maybe you even know someone who died. In fact, my son-in-law's grandfather died of COVID. And the grief cycle, the classic Kubler-Ross grief cycle starts with denial. This isn't happening. Sound like somebody we know in the presidency? This isn't happening. There's no problem with this. Then there's anger. This isn't happening, and I'm really mad if it is. And then there's depression, and a lot of people are still in the depression loop, right? And then there's bargaining. Well, can I make this? Can I get out of this situation, even if the other people aren't out of this situation? But the final stage of the grief cycle is acceptance. That you've lost something that was dear to you, and now, but when you can't move on until you accept. And so I think those, we noticed that word being used in the same way. For us, it's the starting point of a new design. And in the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, it's the ending point of grief, when you finally are ready to move on from a loss. I think a lot of us are still in anger, depression, and bargaining, right? And it's okay. The whole purpose of Kubler-Ross, and she was studying how people survive trauma and grief, was that you can't short circuit. You can't go from, okay, I'm really pissed and I'm angry and depressed, to, all right, everything's fine. You actually have to go through all the stages. And so I think it's okay for people to give themselves permission to be depressed. For that student who says, I just don't see how this is going to work. And to be listened to from the point of view of, I hear you, and I just want to acknowledge that it's okay right now to feel a little depressed, and to feel like you're angry because you really did lose something. This is tangible loss for lots and lots of people. And it certainly pointed out for me, for my students, the different assets that the students have to attack this problem with.
Yeah, and what this makes me think of, Bill, is that loss is loss, and grief, and the person who is, I'm thinking of those two scenarios that we painted earlier. The privileged person who is sitting by the pool with powerful Wi-Fi still lost something, whether it was their freedom or their access to things that they were used to having, or the way that they did work, or the social the social network that they had. And then same thing for the person who's having to help their parents lift off of loss of business, and they lost a lot too, and they're both in that bargaining stage where they're negotiating these new realities, and they both have to get to that acceptance stage in their own context, and both are valid, and that's why I keep saying there's no shaming. Everybody's experiencing this from their own world, but the arrival point is, or maybe perhaps the starting point, is the same for both, is that they both have to accept that this is the situation that I'm in. How do you get from that to prototyping? How do both of these individuals get to a point where they're creating exciting prototypes that involve some certain element of risk and excitement and fear, but they have to get to that, and both of their realities shouldn't keep them from doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. There's, you know, so many different studies that say people at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder are actually more compassionate, and they give more as a percentage of their income to charities and things like that. So I think you could even argue that the kid with less privilege has access to more compassion and more understanding. But like you say, there's no shaming. Everybody's pain is their pain, and everybody's depression is their depression. I don't judge that. But we know from studies of creativity that you cannot be creative if you feel endangered or insecure or depressed. I mean, your brain is wired to solve that problem first, and that's perfectly reasonable. But if you have gotten through at least the part of, okay, I think I've accepted where I'm at. Now, how do I move forward? Because all of my plans are gone. I mean, whatever, you know, my offer at Airbnb is gone. My you know, internship is gone. So now you have to start figuring how do I design my way forward? How do I build my way forward? And we build our way with prototypes. The good news is it's never been easier to get an information interview.
Yeah.
Because everybody's just sitting at home and they're sitting in front of their screen.
That's true.
And almost everybody will talk to you because they're bored too. The one big positive of this the spring quarter teaching experience, I reached out to a bunch of people to do a guest, you know, just can you come in and do a talk in my class? I got Johnny Ives. I've been after Johnny Ives, the head of Apple Design, for 10 years to come to class. Never even got past his secretary. I had Johnny Ives come to class. We had Johnny Ives come to class. He did an hour with the students from his studio in London. He was gracious. He was wonderful. He was vulnerable and, you know, disclosing how much this was impacting him. I mean, he's a billionaire, you know, but he, you know, if I can get Johnny Ives to come to class for an hour, you can get anybody you want on a Zoom call for 20 minutes. And so the first kind of prototype is just an information prototype, an information conversation. And all you need to start that is a curiosity. Gee, I'm really curious about how people are reframing classes around online learning. I found someone that's doing this interesting pivot, and they've started this whole online thing, or they've started this series that you've started. I wonder if I could, you know, send them an email and ask them for their story. You're not asking for a job. You're not asking for a reference. You're just saying, hey, you're doing something interesting. I've researched it enough to ask an interesting question. Interesting questions come from interesting people. Interesting people get information conversations, information interviews. Because you were curious about something I'm doing, I'm happy to tell you my story. Our experience is you do 5 or 10 of those kinds of things, and all of a sudden, 2 things happen. One, the network of people working in the area that you're curious about have heard of you. You become visible. And 2, you stop talking about things the way you talk about them, and you started using the language of the insiders. They don't say need finding, they say design research. They don't say, you know, information interviews, they say ethnographic interviews. And so once you've learned the language of the insiders, your curiosity and your questions become much more acute, and you become even more interesting, right? And then that cycle of telling your story. Hey, I just talked to Farouk Day at Johns Hopkins. He's doing this really interesting visions thing. And then I met this person over at Northwestern who's doing something similar from the Siegel Design Institute. And now I'm starting to connect dots that might lead to an interesting opportunity for me, but they make me a member of a community that I'm curious about. And even that is useful.
That's powerful. And yeah, and you become an insider yourself by doing that.
Well, and you become more informed, and you may discover, this online thing isn't my thing. It seems so, you know, it's just not the way I like to do it. But maybe you'll find, you know, we're all reinventing everything we're doing. We all had to. So again, I think there's more opportunities for design than ever before. And for a lot of my students, I said, look, what you're trying to build is a portfolio of skills that you can show people. Because that's, unfortunately, people hire for skills. They should hire for intelligence and creativity and stuff, but they don't know how to interview for that, so they just interview for skills. Fine. You got anything else to do? Let's build skills. We actually put up, for our seniors, we put up 12 skill builder exercises that they could do for extra credit. Because they're always saying, well, I don't have that portfolio. I don't have a thing in my portfolio on UI UX. I don't have a thing in my portfolio on this or that. So, great. Here's 12 assignments. Do these assignments. I won't grade them. I'll help you do them so that you build the skill that this assignment requires to complete. Then we'll put it in a portfolio format so that people can say, oh, I see you know how to use Figma to do UI UX. And then you'll get over that hurdle. And since you have nothing else to do right now, you can watch another cat video. You can Snapchat some more silly filters, to your friends, or it only takes 20 to 30 hours to master half of the software stuff that people want you to see that you know how to do. And if your internship got canceled, let's redesign it around another different kinds of a project. I've never met a company who isn't willing to have someone do a project for free. Do the first one for free, do the second one for money. There's lots of ways to prototype into something where, it's the mindset of, it's the reframe. Okay, it's not going to be a whole internship. Maybe it's just going to be a project. Then it's radical collaboration, the other designer mindset. Sitting in my my study by myself, watching cat videos isn't going to get me anywhere. Get up, go for a walk, come back, learn a new software tool. And the advantage is there's never been easier to do that because there's so much good stuff online.
Yeah.
All the students have access, students anywhere have access for free to the entire, it used to be called lynda.com. I think they now call it LinkedIn Learning or something.
Yeah.
But 20,000 tutorials, really well done tutorials on every piece of software or machine learning. You want to future-proof your job? Take a machine learning class.
Correct.
Take an AI class. Find out how to. There's all this open AI stuff.
Yeah.
Where you can write your own code and connect it up to Watson at IBM.
Yeah.
Give yourself a design challenge and do it.
Yeah.
And it's a leveler. You don't have to be at a prestigious university like, Johns Hopkins or Stanford. You can just be sitting in your shorts and a t-shirt, in someplace, and maybe the bandwidth isn't great. There's been this phenomenon of, because the libraries were closed, but libraries turn out to be one of the major sources of internet for a lot of people. The people are having these like car caravans where they all park in the parking lot as close to the library as possible so they can get a Wi-Fi signal. And that's a brilliant hack.
Yeah.
So get your friends, go down to the library in different, cars or and stay 6 feet apart. Get on a good Wi-Fi signal and learn to code or learn machine, large-scale data analysis or machine learning or something like that. Or if that's not your thing, take a writing class, take a drawing class.
Yeah. Well, I love what you're sharing. Coursera also is offering free access to a lot of college students and a lot of people. So what we're seeing is this movement to free and access, which is all going to help with the equity issue.
Very much so. The other thing is, if you think about it, colleges are kind of like cable companies.
Yeah.
You can only buy the bundle, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And let's say at my school, and I want to be a product design major, but I have to take a bunch of classes on physics and math and engineering. And let's just say that there's a version of this entry-level engineering class that's taught by this guy online out of Berkeley or McAllister or Ohio State, and he's great or she's great. And the version of my school is not that good. So, but I'm bundled. I have to take all the classes from the professors that are in my bundle. But what if it wasn't that way? What if I could take the best introduction to statics and dynamics ever taught by the person who loves teaching it? In fact, there's a guy who does a CS class out of Yale, and all the Ivy Leagues have decided he's got the best class and they just use his. But what if every student could shop for the most exciting professor, or at least the professor that relates to them? I took math wasn't necessarily my best classes at Stanford, but I remember taking a class from one person and everybody said she was great. And I said, yeah, but I don't understand her. I took the same class from a different professor, and he was weird and loopy, but I totally got him. And he got me through calculus. So it's, when the student is ready, the teacher will arrive. Why can't all the students pick the best teacher for them? Because now we're all available. If somebody wants to learn design from me, I just did it online. They could, why not? If somebody wants to, take a class with you around an issue that you're passionate about teaching, the secret of the D School is that all the people who teach at the D School are doing it on overload. They don't get paid extra and they don't get exempted from classes that they teach in their regular department. When they come to the D School, they teach an extra class. But the reason it's so good is that they're willing to teach it because they really love the subject.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but David Kelly and I always tell our students, take the professor, not the class. If somebody loves teaching Shakespeare and it comes alive when they teach it, you're going to love Shakespeare.
Yeah, absolutely.
So wouldn't it be cool if every student could take whatever the subject was from the professor that was the best fit for them? And obviously we'd have to figure out how credits and units and stuff go. But I think this online thing is a real challenge to, the elite schools about, this notion that, well, you have to take all the, you can transfer a few classes in, but you have to take most of the classes, on our campus. And I'm like, I'm going to pay this much money.
There might be enough disruption now that might actually happen. It's reminding me of Stanford 2025. Remember that project? And
yeah.
All of the wild and crazy ideas that came out of that, of the future of the university. We might be now in a situation where we might actually see a lot of that happening. So.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that would be good. One of the big reframes of that for your audience was that David and I are still working on for our major is it was don't declare a major, declare a mission.
Correct.
Because majors are really set up around the way professors like to teach things.
Right.
And they're set up around the way departments are structured, and departments are set up around professional divisions of things, like mechanical engineers do this, the electrical engineers do this, the economists do this. And so we have these verticals, right? Just like in like any product, you have these product verticals. And a major is what you can take inside that vertical. But what if I came to Johns Hopkins to be a community leader, a social advocate, but I believed that the future of equity was built around artificial intelligence for everybody. Mm-hmm. So what's my major? Do I major in computer science and AI? Do I major in sociology and maybe urban planning? Do I major in none of those things? I would want to take enough computer science so that I understood how AI can impact equity. And I'd want to take classes in sociology, society, urban planning. I'd want to take classes in activism, maybe something in Black studies. And why couldn't I put that all together around my mission and have somebody say, okay, that's a degree, go. Yeah. And now I've got 5 advisors. I've got an advisor from the Black Studies program. I got an advisor from the computer science program. I got an advisor from the design program. Yeah. That's a student experience that would be extraordinary.
Yeah, and if you're able to take some of these classes from other universities.
And I can take classes from other universities as well. But frankly, the reason we don't do it, it's too much work for the professors.
Yeah, but now with everybody being on Zoom, and as we start to perfect this art of teaching online and engaging online and having chats and having conversations, we might actually get there. You know, what I love about everything that you've shared so far is that everything to me sounds proactive. That you know, whether it's a process of acceptance or even it's a process of prototyping, that you're really in the process of being proactive and creating and constructing your future, designing your future rather than searching for it. That's why I go against the whole notion of job search and resume writing and the whole, just the linear process of how you develop your career. Doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for most people. Really, it's about constructing your future, designing it, testing it out. There's plenty of uncertainty in that, but there's plenty of rewards if you do it right and if you just take a few risks. And then there's a responsibility in the community to support you in that and to help you create a buffer for it. As you develop those prototypes, where do you take it next? So my prototype could be a book, or it could be a musical, or it could be a startup that I launched, or it could be a website that I created. And I appreciate everything that you said, that to get to that point, it is about gathering information, throwing yourself in some experiences, but then also gaining skills. So you've painted that picture so clearly to us, and now I do have my prototype. I gotta know if it works. Does this work? Is the world gonna respond well to this? Where do you go from there in COVID-19, where we're still in lockdown and we're still engaging mostly with one another through a computer camera? How do I put this out to a sample group to see if this works out?
It works. And that's, that as prototypes become more and more refined, they actually, there's a big difference between a prototype and a pilot. A pilot is, I think I got this thing figured out, let's launch it, and we'll do it, we'll do a beta launch and then we'll do a big launch. A prototype is still trying to figure out what's this thing. But if I'm starting to get towards a pilot and I really need to test things, again, I think we have a huge opportunity now because more people are available to be in your beta or in your trial. And then the other thing I'll just touch on briefly, because I know we're going to run out of time, is we have a concept in the new book, Designing Your Work Life, called the maker mix, assuming everybody's a maker. If you want to know if your prototype's working, you got to know what you want to measure, right? And what most people do is they get stuck in this money versus meaning. Well, I want to do something meaningful, but I need to make money. So I need a resume that makes me money, and and I can't afford to do the meaningful work. And so again, we just decided that was a false dichotomy, and we said, no, look, you get paid in 3 different currencies, if you will. In the market economy, you get paid money. That's how you measure. If you want to know if your startup's going to make money, you're measuring money. Cost of acquisition of the customer, total lifetime value of the customer, or whatever. But in the social economy, you measure impact. I'm running, if my prototype is to run this after-school program to keep kids out of gangs, then I'm counting the number of kids who are playing ball, in my after-school program. I'm not counting money. I'm counting impact. And then when people do the Odyssey plan, which is the biggest assignment in the first book, it's the three versions of your life. 100% of the time, something is in there about, I want to be more creative. I want to have more creativity in my life. Okay, we went and talked to the artists. We said, what do you guys measure? And they go, we measure expression. If I get to go to open mic night and recite my poem, or I get to, put my play on at the local school, if I get to express my creativity, that's how I get paid. So if you're thinking about your prototype and you want to measure, is it working? Ask yourself, am I measuring dollars, impact, or expression? Because I can get paid in expression, and I might not want to get paid in dollars for the thing. If I want to get paid in dollars for my art, then I have to paint the art you like. Mm-hmm. That's not what I want to do. Mm. And the only time people get mixed up is when they think, well, I want to get money for expression, or I want to get impact. I want to get impact, but I'm just going after money. So I think it helps to figure out how do I know if my prototype's working? I have to measure something. Am I going to measure its impact in the world? Am I going to measure its value in terms of my personal expression? Or am I going to measure money? And everybody defaults to money, but that's not the only way to measure. Yeah. Einstein said everything that can be counted doesn't necessarily count, and things that count cannot always be counted, or something like that.
Yeah.
You can't always measure things that if you use the wrong tool, you'll measure incorrectly. So think about money, impact, and expression when you're measuring the value of your prototype.
Fascinating conversation, Bill. One last question: in one word, or image, or brief sentence, what does describe the future? Image, word, or sentence. What's the first thing that comes to mind as we wrap this up?
Hope.
Great.
I was in a demonstration that came in my neighborhood on Black Lives Matter, and I had done my Black Lives Matter poster, and we were all. But somebody at the very beginning of the protest was marching down 3rd Street. She had a big sign up that said "Hope." Yeah. And that's what I think. I think in this chaos and all these layers of pain we've been just talking about and describing, I sense, particularly in my student generation and the generation between, whether it is 15 to 35, energy, passion, and hope that we can make this better.
Mm. Beautiful. I absolutely agree, and I'll add to that, probably no more dress shoes. But I could be completely wrong. It is so much fun to hang out with you. I've missed having proximity with you and not being on the same campus. But look at what Zoom is doing these days.
Next time we can travel and I come out to the Boston area, I'll drop in. I still have good friends there.
Absolutely. Yeah, would love to have you anytime. Baltimore, not Boston, but would love to have you anytime. On behalf of everybody who is your follower, really, and everybody, thank you for everything that you're doing. You and Dave have really started a revolution with this life design. You're giving hope to a lot of people to think about the future differently. I want to thank everyone who logged in today. There were just hundreds of you online today, and you've asked too many questions for us, and we could not get to all of them. So good luck, everyone. Here's to hope for a brighter and better future, and our best to Dave Evans, who couldn't join us today, but I am sure he will love the conversation. And we'll see you next time at Vision Chats. Thank you all. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.